Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are discussing my top 6, there would be more, but the top 6 best yarns for vintage knitting and why. Because certain yarns work way better for vintage knits than others. If you've worked with vintage patterns before, you'll know that most of the yarns don't actually exist from pre-1950s. Minus one exception on my list we'll talk about that later. A lot of different, patrons or Sunglow had yarns they would be recommending, usually from their own company or from something similar. They don't exist anymore. So the ones that I'm presenting today are ones that I've found can really set you up for success. So I'm just going to be showing you some examples as I talk about some of these different yarns. I'm going to be showing pieces that I have made with these yarns so you can sort of see how they knit up. Let's get into it, sheepies. Okay, first up is definitely going to be Jameson Smith. They are wonderful. If you've ever been to Shetland, or specifically Lerwick, because that's where they're located, whether it be for Shetland Wool Week or a trip, I highly recommend, if you're ever going, by the way, to stop in and visit them. It is a religious experience. I cried during my journey there because I was so happy. I was surrounded by wool. It's not that surprising. Jameson and Smith are really, really wonderful for color work. The natural sort of grippiness of Shetland wool makes it amazing for color work. Everything knits together, there's no gapping, and color work, as we know, is very, very prominent in knitwear from the 1920s really up through the 1940s. Especially after Edward, the king that married Wallis Simpson. There's a whole Madonna movie about it, after he stepped out wearing a Fair Isle vest. That really brought the Fair Isle knitting to the masses in popularity. Their yarn also comes in an absolute fuckload of colors. I mean, any color you can possibly think of, they probably have. Not to mention the fact that they've got multiple different kinds of plies, textures, weights. I prefer the 2-ply jumper weight for my vintage knits, just what I like to do. Also, for the eco-friendly knitters, Jameson Smith is 100% wool, unadulterated by superwashing, any plastic, any non-eco-friendly stuff. It is completely traditional. Something to also think about is that they are a very accessible brand price-wise. Most of their skeins are about 3 to 5 pounds, with varying yardages, making color work a lot easier, so you're not buying immense amounts for small areas. They are the only company on my list that is old enough actually to be referenced in some of my older patterns, dating back into the 1940s. I mean, they've been around a while. Next up, we have Northlight Fibers. Now, this is in direct contrast with Jameson and Smith. They are far less structural and much, much softer. However, that does mean that blouses and cardigans and things you want to drape nicely work really, really well. Most of the time when I've bought for projects, I've bought from Spring Street, which is their collection of fingering wool. I find that they have a really lovely color selection. While it's not a huge color selection, all of the colors are very, very vibrant. And I find that can mimic a lot of vintage sweaters. Also, they work really, really well with color work. I would not use, though, different wools in conjunction. I would buy, if you were going to do a cardigan and do color work, I would buy all of the colors within them, just because I think they might not mesh as well with different yarns. Also, all of their yarns are completely solid. A lot of modern yarns nowadays have heathering or tweeding or feathering of other colors, which is not incredibly accurate for a lot of vintage knits, as that was sort of seen as something that wasn't as desirable. But Northlight Fibers are very, very saturated, and it works really nicely. This yarn also contains no synthetic and is made in America's Rhode Island. It is a smaller company, and I haven't really seen it sold outside of the Northeast, where I'm from originally, but I know that you can order online from them, and I will link their website below. Because of the quality of the yarn, like I mentioned earlier, it drapes really, really well, making it for vintage knitting really good for 1930s pieces. This yarn sits in the upper middle of the pricing range for a skein of yarn. It sits at about $25 to $30, depending on where you're buying it from. So it's a nice treat yourself yarn, but not I need to sell a kidney to make a sweater yarn. Keep those in there. Now, for my American knitters, I'm sure it will come as no surprise that the next name on my list is Miss.Babs. Miss.Babs yarn is really, really well known for their beautiful hand-dyed yarns, but their colors are also super punchy. Specifically, I like their DK and their fingering wool. Though I have used other wools by them, I find that the DK, which is called Killington, is a mix of wool and silk, and I find it has the wonderful structure of a vintage wool with a beautiful sheen of a silk. So it really gives off a very luxurious vibe, but it also warm and structural, and it will keep the shape of a vintage. It's also thick enough for hats and keyhole scarves. It will keep its shape. Some of you may recall that for my Scarlett Johansson Jojo Rabbit remake, and I think it was July last year, I used Miss.Babs Tarta. And it's one of my favorite sweaters to wear, and anytime I go out for brunch or anything, usually it's the first one I grab. Now, the one thing to be aware of when working with Miss.Babs is that a lot of their yarn is superwash. However, that's not a blanket statement. Some of their yarns, like the former Holston, and I believe it's not their Killington DK, but one of their DKs is not superwashed. So that can lend an air of machine washability. It's something that I choose personally not to usually buy, but in terms of Miss.Babs, because of the colors and the other attributes, I will buy a machine washed wool from them. So, side tangent, something I think we need to talk about when we talk about vintage wool is the fact that we machine wash a lot nowadays. Now, that means that a lot of our vintage sweaters that we are looking at today are slightly felted, or the colors have mixed a little bit, lending to a really cozy vibe. Now, obviously they're not machine washable. Our modern yarns are, but that means that they're not going to knit together in the same way. Also, from an ecological standpoint, machine washing is not really something that wool is supposed to do. So let's delve into a mini side tangent about what superwashing is. Now, the first thing is a plastic coating. That will allow the yarn to be, washed and washed and washed, but you also will be shedding microplastics, not only into the water, but also they can be getting into your blood, your lungs. Not really great for you. And the second way you can machine wash things is by literally stripping the ever-loving shit out of them with chemicals. But as always, no yarn shaming, because I also will buy them. Especially if you are talking about knitting something for someone that you know at Christmas is never going to put this in anything but a washing machine. If you value your work, I have done this, you buy the superwash. No yarn shaming. Now, price-wise, Miss.Babs is really interesting because they do sit on the higher end at $30 a skein. However, most of them, especially their DKs, come in yardages that are worth about 2 skeins of yarn, or what I would consider a normal 2 skeins. Meaning that if you are thinking about this is 2 skeins worth of yarn for $30, you're technically, my rationalization is it's $15 the skein. That works, right? Next up we have Kellborn. Oh my God, I love Kellborn. Oh, they are such a good yarn for any sweater that you're making. It is so versatile. Usually I turn to Kellborn because of their amazing range of colors and because of their extremely affordable prices. So especially for those really big projects that are going to be very yardage consuming, they are a great choice. Their prices usually range up to about $15. That's the most expensive I've ever seen it being sold for, and their colors are solid. So they are great for color work, especially for really big men's Fair Isle sweaters. They work really, really well because you're going to need to buy more yardage usually. It isn't an extremely structured wool unless you're really going to size down your needles, so you will have a little bit of a blousy texture. I recommend this wool especially for men's knits from probably the mid-20s up through the 70s, and I'd say for women you could probably get away with it probably the 60s, maybe late 50s through the 70s. I really think that that is when this wool will work the best. So this wool I only discovered like a year and a half ago. I was on a trip to Michigan to visit my grandmother on my dad's side, and I walked into this store in Ann Arbor, and I found this amazing wool. A lot of you are probably going to remember it from the Can I Knit 3 Projects in 20 Days for Shetland? It was the vest that I knit, the Fair Isle Susan Crawford vest. I knit completely out of Cumbria, minus I think the trim was Devon Calborn. This is such a good yarn for color work. They are amazing. The colors are punchy and solid. It is gold standard in my opinion. Even though it's a newer find for me, I think it is one of the best wools for vintage knitting. It mimics the vintage wool so well. Not to mention the fact also that their colors are gorgeous. They're a little bit more toned back. You don't have as big of a selection, or at least I haven't seen as big of a selection. However, the fact that I bought recently quite a bit more, I mean, that's very telling. I love this wool. This yarn is on the pricier side at $29 a skein. However, it is similar to the Miss.Babs in the fact that there is a lot more yardage than a normal skein of yarn for that price. But because of everything I just said, even if I do need to buy more, I am way more willing to invest in this yarn because I think it is definitely worth the investment. Wonderful for color work, and it really just mimics that vintage wool so well. So I think it's worth the price tag. The last wool we are going to be talking about today is La Bien-Aimée, is our last wool that we are going to be talking about today. I love this yarn. However, I've only worked with it once and I am already converted. It is very similar to the Cumbria in the fact that the colors are a little bit toned down, a little bit pulled back, but at the same time, the finish is gorgeous. I worked on this for a Nordic vest that I had done from a vintage pattern, and I found that it really held the structure in the same way that the Jameson Smith or the DK of this Miss.Babs would. It's very thick, it's very hardy, it's very, very, very warm. And it's hand-dyed in pairs. So that's just like super cute. I think it works really, really well for color work, and I also find that for finishing, when you weave in the ends, it's very invisible, which is nice. Now, while it works really, really well for World War II patterns and for Fair Isling, it does tend to pill. So one of my solutions, actually, a lot of these will tend to pill. One of my solutions is I found, also on my trip to Ann Arbor, I found a razor, a wool razor that I know many people use the stones, the de-pilling sweater stones. I find those work okay. I think this is my favorite de-pilling tool ever. It's by CocoKnits, and I'm sure you can find it online. I know they also sell it at Spun. I will try to link something below, but I find that it's very, very, very helpful. La Bien-Aimée, because of the euro, is going to be for the Americans on the higher end of the pricing scale. It's about 25 to 28 euros per skein, and they are, you know, some pretty hefty yardage. But for the Americans, because of the exchange rate, usually that's about $30 to $35 for us, depending. So I think that is our most expensive yarn of the day. However, if you have a friend in a foreign country that can buy it for you and ship it to you, it's more reasonable. Hey, hey! I'm interjecting one honorable mention here for West Yorkshire spinners. I've worked with them for the Beetlejuice pattern. I've only done that one sweater, so I don't have enough experience with them to say they're one of my favorite go-tos, because obviously I haven't worked with them enough. La Bien-Aimée was similar, but I've worked with them a little bit more. It is really, really beautiful yarn. I highly recommend it. I'm going to be working with it a lot more this summer, so it might be making the list onto another video if I do another one of these, an updated list, shall we say. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. This has been so much fun. I hope I've piqued your interest in some new yarns just a little bit. I don't have any affiliation with any of the companies I recommended today, but I will be linking their websites below in case you want to check any of them out. I just think they're wonderful, and even if you're not going to be, you know, buying for a project, I always enjoy sort of window shopping from afar. It's great for the creative color work in your brain, just sort of figuring out what colors you like next to each other. Just like oohing and eyeing at pretty colors. Please Please let me know in the comments what your favorite yarns are. I would love to have more ones to try, to look at, to go, you know, find something new for my next project. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps me, and it helps you, because when you're trying to find, you know, your weekly dose of the knitting fairy, I'm right there. I'm like on your page. See you later, my little sheepies. Bye-bye.